Welcome to the Mad in America podcast, your source for science, psychiatry, and social justice.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Mad in America. Our guest today is award-winning recovery leader, Becky Brasfield. Ms. Brasfield is a policy researcher and certified recovery support specialist whose work is based in Chicago. She currently works as a policy researcher for Human Services Research Institute. Ms. Brasfield is a peer support specialist for Community Counseling Centers of Chicago, where she provides recovery support services and professional facilitation training programming. She also served recently, as president of the NAMI Illinois Alliance of Peer Professionals, the state of Illinois' first peer professional association. Becky, welcome to Mad in America.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, Becky, you have written about a diverse range of topics, from a practical guide for recovery model practitioners to physics. But I want to begin closer to your own personal experience, if you don't mind. So could you briefly tell us about your lived experience of living with psychosis?
Absolutely. My lived experience is about illness and recovery, I like to say. I have a schizoaffective condition, and it's a severe condition when untreated. And it's a combination of schizophrenia and bipolar illness. And for me, getting a proper diagnosis was important to me, just in the sense that I needed to be honest with myself about what exactly I was confronted with in my experience. So for me, my lived experience, it didn't necessarily have to come from a medical provider giving me that diagnosis, because I went through a lot of self-exploration of figuring out what is my correct diagnosis myself, and also getting that affirmed by a professional. So I'm a very strong believer in self-exploration of understanding oneself as a part of my lived experience. I was hospitalized 2 or 3 times in a psychiatric unit. I was incarcerated twice for my mental illness because the delusions were severe enough where I became out of control. And so I received mental health probation. But my lived experience it goes all the way back to childhood. And I've dealt with trauma, major depression, suicide attempts, night terrors. So I also had some addiction problems. I don't use substances anymore. But I also want to just share just briefly, Ayurti, that part of my lived experience is that I'm in recovery from a lot of family stress that I think impacted my mental health, dealing with racism in America and in schools and education, which I think definitely impacted my mental health, and even sexual harassment and things like that, which I think affected my mental health. And I think often when we talk about lived experience, we don't talk about the social issues that bring about some of these severe issues that result in diagnoses.
Thank you first for sharing that. I remember at a recent ISPS conference, you stated that, mental health is often always about much more than mental. So could you get into a little bit of, at least personally for you, what, in your opinion, were like the larger sociocultural or structural issues that you thought were important in this form of distress that you experienced?
I can't disconnect the diagnosis from the social condition. And I really wish that psychiatry would start addressing that, but I don't think that's going to happen. So I think that's going to happen from the lived experience and consumer survivor movement. For me, family stress and some of the family dynamic models, there's a lot of domestic violence and lots of things like that happen that bring about a lot of challenges. That is a big issue. Racism that affects and ethnocentrism, and even what we're seeing right now with wars, global wars, are affecting a lot of people's mental health. Just recently, my therapist told me that all her clients were talking and crying about things that are going on in the world. They're not talking about, oh, this is what happened to me at the job. They're talking about global and national events and that's affecting their mental illness. Yet when you go to psychiatry, you have a biological thing, and this is what we're going to give you medication for. And so there's a disconnect. When I was in graduate school, what led to my severe psychosis and incarceration, I already was racism, pure and simple racism and sexism. I realized, these things that I heard people talk about for decades in books could happen even in this day and time. So I'm positive because I walked into school healthy. I mean, I was as healthy as I could ever be. And I walked out completely disabled. And that just shouldn't happen in an educational system. So I think that when we just medicate and blame the lived experience rather than treat the system, now that educational system, that racism still hasn't been treated and it still hasn't been named. So that's why when I introduced my experience, I introduced both of my lived experience, not just the diagnoses or the condition, but also the systemic oppression.
Thank you. What you said about global conditions reminded me of a few years ago, I had interviewed Michael Unger. And I remember he gave me an example of a kid who is showing, let's say, symptoms that might seem depressive or acting out or suddenly angry and hurting others. And he connected it so beautifully with global oil prices change and how something like that meant that his father could not work in the oil field that he was, so had to go and work far away, which led to, let's say, lesser money at home, which eventually affected that he could not be in the little league, that he was because they could not afford uniforms this time or something like that. And so by losing the friends that he was losing, people he was hanging out with, and it shows up in the symptom, right, which is that this kid is now acting out and how it is related to these huge global things that we never even think about.
That is a great example. And I think what happens is even well-meaning providers say, okay, I hear you, but what can I do about that? What can I do about global oil prices? Well, what I say is you may not be able to directly do anything about that, but you can validate. First of all, you can start by validating it. And that's why I talked about the medical gaslighting. Mm-hmm. If we are denying that these systemic issues are affecting people's health, then we are a part of the problem. So the first problem is we can actually identify and say, you know what? This is happening in the world and this is affecting you. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to deny your reality. I may not be able to change it, but I'm not contributing to psychosis. I'm not going to create this denial on a part of you and say, oh, well, you should just be okay with that or whatever.
So I want to talk a little bit about your experience with the mental health systems, right? Could you tell us maybe a little bit more about what was helpful or what was harmful, or even just, what could have been done differently in your case?
I had a psychiatric nurse who I really thought was very good because she listened to me. She was very respectful of me. I know not everyone needs medication. Unfortunately, I do. And the reason why I do is because the damage that was done with all that trauma was so severe. I believe there's some kind of mild traumatic brain damage that was done. So I need medication to correct it. So when she was in panic, she prescribed me an injectable. And so for people who don't know, an injectable is just an injected psychotropic medication that you get like usually once a month. And a lot of people don't like it. I didn't want it. It was kind of it was coercive. I'll say that. It was coercive. I lost some of my vision. I had 20/20 vision immediately after. I can't see right. So here we go with the medical gaslighting and all this. So I tell her, I can't see. Oh, it's got to be something else. We just did this and it's got to be something else because she doesn't want to acknowledge that maybe this was what happened. And I'm not blaming her. I'm not suing her. I'm not doing any of that. I'm saying we need to take accountability so you can let them know and, tell the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, this is a side effect. So you see the domino effect. So now she was helpful to me for so long, but when she panicked and she made a mistake, it happens. Now I have lost some of my vision with a coercive decision. And so now she doesn't want to take responsibility for it. So now people are continuing to take these injectables, and we don't know what effects these are having on people because many of it is coerced. And so what I would say is you can have someone who helps you and also does something that is unhelpful at the same time. And how do we have to hold those spaces together? So things that they can do, we talk about training. Everybody says we need better training, but is it the lived experience that has to train the clinicians? And then they say, oh, well, the clinicians are the experts and the lived experience are not. And so this is what I'm trying to bring to the surface. Why is it that the lived experience is being put at the bottom of this hierarchy when clearly we have feedback to improve the whole system? Now I'll tell you about things that have worked really, really well. Okay. When I was in the hospital, I got peer support. Peer support did a wonderful job because connected with me, told me, you don't have to do anything, but we're here for you if you want it. I said, that sounds good. Not coercive, not forcing, but I said, I think I can listen. I think I can listen to this. So I followed up with that person. I had a social worker who said, I believe in you. I believe in you. You're going to work again. You're going to do something with your life. Actually believing that I could do better than the psychiatrist that told me you'll never work again. Believing in people and seeing hope. So not believing in this system, because this is my main issue, and this is the new program and campaign we're hoping to work on. We have to stop the psychiatric abuse that's keeping people that are consumers as inferior to everybody in the system. It's a systemic issue. We're inferior to researchers, to social workers, to clinicians, to doctors, to family members. It's all set up to keep us inferior. It has to stop because it's contributing to abuse in the healthcare system. It is absolutely dysfunctional. So our goal is to stop this and have it totally eradicated.
Can you speak a little bit about that, the medical gaslighting part? I know you have talked about it. So what is it? Just the basics, right? And then maybe if you feel like getting deeper into it for our listeners.
Well, just to keep it really simple, I don't want to use words that are going to be activating to people, but some people call it medical crazy making. If you don't like that word, medical gaslighting is how the medical profession uses tactics to create doubt about the service user's reality of what is going on. It's really a dishonest practice. It's a cover-up. That's what it is. It's a cover-up. It's a medical cover-up. It's a very peculiar relationship that happens. And it really, to me, comes from a place of self-doubt within psychiatry that they don't really know. They know less than what they're acknowledging. They have less expertise than what they're trying to present as if they know more about the medications and the effects than what they really have. So to cover it up, they create a doubt in the consumer and service user. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe you don't know, rather than questioning their own establishment and research and saying, you know what, you are seeing something. We should take a look at this study. We should look and see if there's other research that is confirming your experience. That would be the more humane, rational, and logical thing to do.
I also wanted to touch upon something else that you said. And one of it was, you said, psychiatry doesn't know, and often it responds with this kind of medical gaslighting. And but it pretends to know. And it reminded me of the psychiatric community's response to Joanna Moncrief's article a few years ago. Moncrief, when they did this huge umbrella review that showed once and for all that the serotonin theory of depression is just nothing, right? This is nothing. And it was really interesting because the response of half the psychiatric community was, well, of course it is. And the other half was, well, of course we knew that. Why do you keep doing the same research? Everyone knows that, right? So which one is it?
That is an excellent point to bring up that study, because we still haven't reckoned with it. I mean, what are we really finding out in all this research? What does this mean for their field?
Yeah.
I mean, what does this really say? I mean, are you helping the pharmaceutical industry with a finding that helps them for their cause at our expense? That's abuse. Or are you actually doing research to find out what's going on? And to me, there's something wrong with this, because I talk to service users all the time, and we knew this a long time ago. So how is it possible that everybody on the street knew this a long time ago, and you all are saying something else? You're either not experts, and it's partially service users' fault. We have to take some responsibility over this in our community. Why are we giving them expert authority when clearly this is a sign something is wrong? There are multiple warning signs. Something is wrong in psychiatry, but we are not checking it out. So I think it's time for us as a community, we have to make a decision. Do we trust as a whole, not individually, because there are some great psychiatrists out there and providers, but as a community, do we really trust their judgment based on the decades of work that they have done?
Which brings me to what does peer support look like for psychosis? I know you've worked so extensively in the field of peer support and recovery movement. So I wanted to talk briefly about what is the recovery movement, especially in the context of psychosis.
I joined the peer movement in the 2000s, and it's very helpful to me. It's been a power, a strength. It's all about lived experience and lived expertise. It's about focusing on strengths. Mm-hmm. It's about advocacy, and that's really important. Part of what I think is so powerful is that as a service user, I have learned I must be an advocate. There is no other way. Because if I'm not an advocate in this mental health system, I am going to end up at the bottom. If I don't advocate for my treatment, I will not get good treatment. It's not possible to be healthy for me. I don't know about other people, but I won't stay healthy if I don't advocate for myself all the time. So peer support is about advocacy when it's not co-opted. It's about advocacy. It's about focusing on strengths. It's about having hope. This is a movement that very much gave hope to people in recovery. There's different parts of it. Like, for example, there's a branch that doesn't really join with the mental health, and that's the veterans. They have their own peer support. Sometimes they don't even call it, it's like veteran support, but it's a type of peer support. They do a very different thing. Like, they like to get together and do more activities and, like we're going to build a boat, or we're going to, do this kind of thing, or, whatever they do. But it's peer support, and it's mental health for what they deal with being veterans and things like that. There is peer support for substance use recovery. And some people identify addiction recovery. The issue that I've dealt with, because I connect with both those fields of mental health and substance use, addiction recovery. The substance use, and I'm going to say this because I don't hear it talked about. The addiction and substance use, this might be controversial, but this is what I think, thinks they are better than the mental health peer group. And the reason I say that is because they don't really want to be connected. And the stigma with the mental illness, they don't want to be connected. And they're very funny when people say substance use addiction is a mental illness. No, it's not. When they recover, they're like, we don't have a problem. We're in recovery. When the mental health people, it's like, you all are still sick. And so I notice they are looking down on us as well. And that's why they don't like to combine the services. And the veterans don't like to combine the services with the mental health either. And that's what's going on. So the peers are very strong because everybody is using from the mental health model, but everybody is not just standing on the shoulders, they're standing on our faces and disrespecting. And that has to stop. I'm speaking it because I'm not going to let it be a secret and let it be happening under the table. It has to come to the surface. That kind of disrespect and that oppression should not be happening in the field.
So I want to talk a little bit about when peer support is co-opted, because one of the things that I've noticed is there are some incredible movements that come up in the mental health field, and the pace with which they get absorbed or co-opted or sterilized takes my breath away sometimes. I remember Diana Rose, who is, an advocate for it, and I interviewed her a few years ago, and she talked about this. She talked about just being sick of having service user voices being used as sound bites for different researchers. So that was how lived experience can also get co-opted. Could you tell me a little bit about how peer support movements can also get co-opted?
I have to navigate these spaces very carefully. I give you an example of the research. I was going to publish with a journal, a top journal, and have been accepted with revision. The top editor wanted me to want me to what I call whitewash the advocacy out of the paper and then say it would be good to go. And what was the real issue? Well, the term behavioral health. One of the topics of the paper was that the term behavioral health is a problem for a lot of service users. They don't like it. This editor said, well, I know our audience. They're not going to be happy with this. So the providers, the clinicians, the psychiatrists, all that, they don't want to hear criticism of this. They don't want to hear lived experience perspective about a term they're using to describe us. They don't want to hear our view. So the only way to get it published is to take it out. I said, this movement is bigger than this journal. I withdraw. It will get published elsewhere. Now, with all due respect, I respect the journal and all that, but I have to speak the truth. So that's the co-opt. You say you want the lived experience writer to participate, but you don't want the lived experience perspective in the paper. That's not going to work out. And that's the problem. You don't really want to know how we feel. You just want to say, check a box, we had a lived experience writer. I don't do that. So what's really going on? That's why I say this psychiatric abuse, Time's Up on the psychiatric abuse campaign, it's not just the psychiatrist. I don't want it to be confused. It's not any individual psychiatrist. It's the whole system. And that includes the big box, because they're co-opting the peer movement And can I give you one more example, please? I saw there was a lived experience homelessness conference in California where in the United States, where they have a very big homelessness controversy. I said something to the organizer. I said, why is a homelessness unhoused conference cost $350 at a hotel? I said, I don't understand that. How could you have a homelessness unhoused conference cost $350? Oh, well, we have scholarships. We have scholarships and everybody that, whatever. I said, okay, this is the problem. I said, you don't understand. When somebody is unhoused and all that, they don't have time to fill an application for a scholarship.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be centering them. You make it free and then make the people that are housed have to pay $350. That's how you do it. She never wrote back. So this is what I'm trying to say. They co-opt. And guess who was sponsoring that? The National Football League and all these Cisco and all these things and big tech things. They want to co-opt so they can say, oh, we did a lived experience. We help with the homelessness. But they're not doing real lived experience. They're doing phony stuff and it doesn't go anywhere. I never heard anything else about that conference.
No, I see the same thing with the global mental health movement, right? When I attended a recent conference, which was all about this, and I asked them, so, okay, you've been talking about structural determinants of mental health, things like poverty, discrimination, violence, trauma, creating all of these mental health issues in the global south. How do you fix that? They came back to antidepressants. You're telling me that farmer suicides caused by all of these multiple systemic issues. And then what do? We go and say, hey, take this antidepressant. And so we even co-opt and absorb the whole movement around structural determinants of mental health. They use it, they give it lip service. It sounds very good, but there is no real change. It comes back to taking psychopharmaceuticals. And that it even neuters or, any kind of radical change that could happen, which then leads me to probably the most important question I have, and the last one for today. You have talked about lived experience and how people with lived experience and their voices and their knowledge and their experiences have to become the lead authority in mental health. What would that look like for you?
What it's going to look like is it's going to be a transition, okay? Because right now, lived experience is an authority in many ways. I mean, a lot of the things that lived experience has advocated for are leading the field. If you looked at some of the holistic healthcare, if you look at the many pathways, if you look at peer support, if you look at all of the different models that the HOPE model,
Yep.
recovery, model, all that stuff that's, really co-production, all that kind of stuff that's happened, it's really leading the field. But what's happening is there's still a problem within us that we still haven't addressed, and that is we ourselves are still giving psychiatry the expert authority role. It's in our minds. It's a mental block, I think. We still look to them as the authority. We're still going to their research thinking, like it's still okay to go to their research, but too many of us are still going to their research thinking, this is right, this is law, this is that. We're still going to them thinking they know what's best. The shift happens when we have a global consciousness change, when we recognize they are not the experts they purport to be. The system that they have created, this that they have created is dysfunctional. And we start to see that there is the possibility for a new system. So what does that look like? It starts when we start rejecting false prescriptions for our problems. So like you said with the antidepressant, if I'm having a problem with, domestic violence, and somebody said, well, here, take this antidepressant. Okay. Sure. An antidepressant might be one option if I have suicidal, or if I'm very depressed and that's an issue. But an antidepressant isn't going to solve domestic intimate partner violence. That's not going to save my life. That's not going to keep my children safe. That's not going to do any of that stuff. It's a false solution to the problem. Okay. So we have to reject false solutions. We have to that's why my talk was about reality testing. When you have a problem that's stationed in social issues, while you may need a medical solution to help you, you still have to do a solution focused in what the problem is. And we have to start by acknowledging what the problem is and validating each other. So the new look of society is among each other, among lived experience, among survivors, among ex-patients, among service users. We start by validating the reality that the problems that we have were not solely caused by a biological issue. And we start naming what they were caused by. That doesn't mean we blame anybody. That doesn't mean we have to take anybody to court. It doesn't mean we have to do anything. We're just honest. It's an honest movement. This is why I got sick. This is what happened. This is what traumatized me. And this is what's going on. Okay. It could be because I did something wrong. Maybe I, insulted somebody the other day. Okay. And I'm starting to feel anxiety. I'm going to be honest about it. Whatever it is, we're going to take accountability for it. Okay. And so that's the beginning of it. So it starts by being honest. And then the next thing we do is we acknowledge that all of these superficial policy changes that are coming out for mental health, we can do all this, but we have to understand that I believe it's globally, but some people may disagree. Mental health is connected to how we think as a society, and that we have to understand that governments and societies care about how people think and how their minds work, and that they are invested in how we perceive the world. Okay, I'm not going to get into anything controversial or any conspiracy theories. All I'm saying is globally, governments are concerned with how people perceive the world, your world view. Okay, so if you perceive your world accurately, that is helpful to your mental health, but your accurate view of the world may not be helpful to certain systems. So understand that that is an act almost of defiance. So be mindful of that. And that a barrier to being honest with yourself about what is causing your mental health issue, okay, are that there are systems that are committed to you thinking and perceiving differently. So just acknowledge that. You don't have to challenge it. You don't have to launch any kind of campaign or something. Just understand that. And then finally, recognize that we are funding certain issues in certain ways. I'll speak for the United States. The Department of Defense, war, it's funded with an unlimited account. Mental health is very important to society. And I want people to just consider that your mental health may be funded in ways that you don't understand. I'm just doing this to practice what I preach. Just consider that your mental health, you may not think it's funded because it's not funded in the way that you want it to be funded. But the things that you think about and the control of your mind and perceptions may be funded. You just may not see it. Okay? So the system of psychiatry is set up so that other systems can function. So as soon as we start to understand that and start getting honest, the whole system will change. It always happens. Look at history. So the first act we can do is individually in the work that we do to be honest about what we're reading, what we're doing in our healthcare, and reject the false solutions.
I really like the idea that you put forward of these false solutions, this phrase. I mean, I've talked about these concepts, but I've never thought about them as false prescriptions and false solutions. It's very powerful. I was also going to say something about what you said about, this investment that people in power have in the ways that we think, and of course the ways that we consume. And I mean, there has been some wonderful work done about psychology and its historical allegiance to very fascist regimes. And even partly my work has been about that, at least in India, in the way that it provides concepts that can be used towards very fascist ends, essentially, and it gives these dangerous narratives their scientific backing.
Can I add to that? Because I think you made a great point, and this will come down to an intellectual, I don't want to call it argument. It will come down to an intellectual standoff. And I think ultimately brighter ideas will prevail. Because once the brighter idea and analysis sheds light on what's happening in the field, this will all change. I mean, I think people will be shocked by what they see is happening in the field. They will be shocked because I think it's one of those things where you kind of lift the veil and then you see, is that really what was going on? And that people didn't know what they were doing and they didn't have the skills that you thought they had. They were acting as if. And then you realize there was so little behind those numbers and behind those studies, and that so many things are getting retracted because things are just getting fixed so that we can say this works and it really doesn't. And when all the truth starts to come out and people realize you don't know what you're talking about and you're just making this up, you're just fixing this stuff with the research. When it comes out, I think the shift will happen and psychiatry will be in its rightful place. And then we can all work together, which is what we should be doing.
Absolutely. I really hope so. I do remind my students, I like to ask them, if we look at the history of psychiatry and psychology and we can look at it, it's littered with ridiculousness and abuse and things that we laugh about and things that we are horrified by. Pulling teeth out to cure schizophrenia or prefrontal lobotomies. Then I have to remind them, it wasn't a horror show for them. Like they thought this was very serious work and they were getting excellent outcomes, right? They had statistics behind doing this. Egan Moniz received a Nobel Prize for prefrontal lobotomy, the same thing that we have in horror movies right now.
Exactly.
What are we doing right now that 30 years from now, people will look back and say, oh my God, what was wrong with these people that they were doing this? That seems absolutely normal.
I want to leave on this note. The one thing that has helped me through all my trials and tribulations is being absolutely honest about the psychiatric establishment, my own healthcare, and myself. And as I have been honest about it, and I have not put them in a place of authority over my own ability to understand myself and my own healthcare, I have stayed okay and I have continued to recover. So I will never, ever give the field the authority over me ever again, ever.
That is a perfect way to end this. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Mad in America podcast. For more news, views, and updates, visit madinamerica.com.